it. My name is Aranza Savas. I am a member of the Stone Mantle team. I lead the meaningful motivation and transformation work that we do along with the collaboratives, and have worked with many of you gratefully, and have the real privilege of working alongside Dave and Joe in much of our work together and in facilitating this conversation today between our two authors of our most recent article in HBR, which we will tell you all about momentarily. But first, some quick introductions. Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Norton.
What about you?
Hello, I'm Dave Norton, and I'm the founder and principal of Stone Mantle. And again, we're super excited to be talking to you guys today about this topic, which we've been working on for quite some time, haven't we, Joe?
Quite some time. Yep. So I'm Joe Pine, and longtime partner with Dave at Stone Mantle, and excited to talk about the latest ideas that we've had.
Yes. So for those of you who haven't seen the article, I will just show a quick screenshot of it so that we can all sort of level set ourselves on the work itself, or at least I think I might, though it's already been one of those times where nothing technical goes as scheduled. So maybe I'll just talk about it in the interest of time. So the title of this article is, "Are Your Digital Platforms Wasting Your Customers' Time?" And what strikes me about this title is that every word in there is really pretty essential to the story. So what we're talking about here is digital platforms. We're talking about time spent, saved, and invested, and worst of all, time wasted. And we're talking about what this means for our customers and for our companies, and the potential impact that we can have for both our business and those we serve as customers. So to start off this conversation, I think we need to sort of level set around what we mean with some of those terms. So your thesis here, guys, is that nobody wants digital tools that waste their time. Everybody wants digital experiences that are time well spent, and yet many of the apps, services, and other digital tools that surround us are doing the opposite. So before we get into the myths that are driving this, I'm going to put you guys on the spot for a second. Can either of you give me an example of a digital experience that's a big waste of time?
You mean like the first 7 minutes of this session?
You win.
That would have to be the first example, right? I mean, my gosh, I think we planned ahead. We tested the technology. We did everything that we could think of to make it work, and it just worked against us. So sometimes the technology just wastes your time, even if you do the best you possibly can, right?
Yeah. And so maybe one of the things we want to talk about as an extension of the article is how to recover from time wasted.
Just acknowledge it up front. I think it's one of the key things you've got to do.
So what do you believe, Joe, we'll start with you, are some of the main reasons that so many digital platforms are a big waste of time?
Well, a big reason is that they're internally focused, instead focused on what their customers actually want to do. They have all these things that they want to get done. They want to make sure that they capture data from it, even though they're generally not using that data well. And so they want to give opportunities for people to give them more data, of which they do nothing with. I think that's the primary reason. They don't understand what the individual living, breathing customer really wants out of the interaction that they're having with their digital program, platform. And which I think, Dave, is an opportunity to talk about the brilliant concept of modes versus moments. Although Rances may have had a question later, but
yeah. I want to build first on what you just said there, Joe. There's no shortage of data.
Right.
Companies have collected tremendous amounts of data, and some haven't used it at all, which is kind of like creates no data experiences. right? Or on this platform, we're going to actually use the word dumb
Oh,
experiences. We weren't allowed to use that in HBR.
right.
But then there are companies that are using data for the express purpose of doing things that the customer really doesn't want them to do with that data. And that's not smart.
Including
Or
selling it to other people to get their eyeballs.
selling it to other people, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the marketplace of sharing data at all. And what we're saying is that not smart form is stupid, because in the long run, the customer catches on to it and they stop sharing with you. So there's a lot of companies out there that are struggling with their data strategy, I would argue.
Yeah, you know, Dave, one of the things I've said for over 20 years, I know it's been at least since 1995, so at least for almost 30 years, is that no company should collect a piece of data on an individual customer unless they intend to use that data to the benefit of that individual customer, right? Not to the general wants. Now I'm kicking myself for saying, well, we should have put that in the article, but
yeah, right.
but it's it's just a
Write
basic
another
rule.
Yeah, and we've not necessarily covered in the article itself, but something that we've talked a lot about in our collaborative programs. Joe, you've talked about it. Mary has talked about it. Arances has talked about it. Is this idea of data experience design, where we're actually designing the data to create an experience for the customer. We're so used to designing interfaces, we're so used to designing programs, but I don't think we take the time to actually think about designing the data so that it actually enhances the experience of the customer. And that's part of one of the things that got left on the chopping table, or the chopping block when we wrote this article.
Right, well, we crunched it down from about 60% bigger.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is your chance, guys. We all have access to the article, so let's dig into some of the other 60% that ended up left behind in the interest of fitting into a digital platform.
All right. Well, so let's start with this idea that Joe just put forward, which is it should be used for the benefit of the individual customer. And that's the basic foundation of this idea of data experience design, is that you know what the customer is trying to get done, the job that they're trying to get done. You identify techniques that encourage them to collect data, but that data is used at their point of use, not at some kind of sales point, but at their point of use. And then that actually helps to make it so that you can start to anticipate what they're going to want next, what they're going to need next. And that virtuous cycle of then allows you to identify new jobs that customers are going to want to get done, and to do those jobs well for them. The classic example of this, of course, would be Apple or Google Maps, where the job, they got to get from point A to point B. You're collecting lots of data about where they are and what they're doing. You're using it to help them get to the place, and you can start to anticipate things like, my tool now allows me to, it tells me where my work is and how long it'll take me to get to my work, just because it's tracking my patterns and it knows what I'm doing. That's the kind of really powerful, genius thinking that I think more companies need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and I think it's also about what you want, right? And so it's not just contextually appropriate, but it's directly related to your goals and your needs. And that goes back, I think, to Joe's point about using this data to meet the needs and get the job done for the customer, as opposed to for the company, which I always kind of distinguish as motivation versus manipulative motivation.
Right. And I think Dave had an important word in there, which is also anticipate, right? Not just about, let me tell you what I want to do, but anticipate what I'm going to do. are what I'm going to want to do. And if you can get to that point, that's when you can become a really valuable tool in every customer's tool set of what they're trying to do to get done the jobs that they have as they go about living their lives.
So Joe, what else got left out?
That's a good
So
question.
much.
So much, yes. But I think a lot of things is what is possible when you have a genius platform, as we talk about it, and the possibilities for that anticipation, and also how it then greatly multiplies what you can do for it. And there's just so many examples of where that is possible. And people are, obviously people are just so, I was going to say enamored, but a lot of people are scared, of the Chat GPT and the other AI things that are going on. But still, what you can do with that is not yet focused on this aspect. And I think that's something that we need to think about with artificial intelligence, is how do we use it to really understand what a customer is all about in this moment in time, right? And right now, right here, right? That's the key thing. There's possibilities like where if you're listening to a movie service or a music service, whether it's through Alexa or Spotify or whatever, why doesn't it adjust itself based on who's in the room and what room you're in and your particular mood at this point in time, rather than thinking, okay, this is what we have to realize that we're all what I like to say is multiple markets. We're all multiple markets. Dave would call these modes and so forth. But they where we're in different markets at different times based on our mood, based on what we're trying to get done, again, based on who we're with. And so if you know who you're with, then you start to be able to pick, particular in this example, music, based on all of that context, right? And that's the key, is the digital context, as we talk about in the article, of understanding what's going on, which means you have to be scooping up all the possible information is there, and then actually do something with it. Again, do something with it for the benefit of the individual customer, which they'll land the individual group of customers often that you have there, because they're each multiple markets within that one customer.
Totally agree.
There's this problem though, where we see so many digital tools being too smart for their own good. So they right? Like I think about my Apple Watch, that oftentimes I'll be, walking around for an hour, and then the second I sit down, it's like, you need to stand up. And it's like, I hate you.
Right.
Well, I would argue that that's an example of not smart, because there's it shouldn't have prompted you at that moment to do that type of a thing.
They're trying to be smart.
Yeah,
like
they're trying.
We see it so often.
But they fail, and they don't. It's because they don't understand context. It really comes down to that. Chat GPT is an order of magnitudes better solution to doing certain tasks, but it's still command based. You say, "Hey, Chat GPT, write me a PowerPoint. Give me this." It's still about give me this, which is very interesting, and it's great, but it can only take you so far. What we're really talking about is being able to look at the data that's in all of these different tools that surround our lives, bring it together in the proper way, and support us to make individuals feel like they have superpowers. They're able to accomplish tremendous things in that particular moment. And I want to build on this idea that we've been talking about. The entire industry seems to be focused on what does the customer want? What does the customer want? But they're not going a step further and saying, what does the customer want in this situation?
Right.
And that's the big shift that we need to make. It's situational analytics. It's not preference analytics. It's not like your past behavior would indicate that this is who you are. It's when people have found themselves in this situation before, this is how they've handled it, so I'm going to support you. It's a totally different thing that we need to be paying attention to.
So this is at least the third or fourth time I've asked, I wanted you to get into mode. So I do want you to talk about that, but let me introduce an example of it done poorly, which I've long talked about. Amazon is a great example of mass customization in trying to understand your preferences and basing what they offer you based on what they've done in the past. But in fact, they're really poor at it because they don't understand what mode I'm in. They don't understand what was a one-off purchase, right? That was, or particularly something that I sent as a gift to somebody, and then they take that into account of what they're going to recommend to me, and just over time realized how increasingly poor they are at any attempt to figure out what it is that I actually might want. I mean, they're down at the 1 to 5% level of any recommendation they make.
Yeah, right. It's gotten worse over time, right?
I think so.
I almost think that's by design, though.
Yeah.
I feel like they've intentionally done that.
Well, then
it just couldn't be that bad.
Yeah. Well, take a look at Netflix, right? 5 years ago, if you'd looked at Netflix, they were constantly recommending to you what you should watch next. Today, they actually don't show a lot of recommendations has kind of been put in the background. What they're suggesting to you, they still recommend, but they recommend based on top trends, these different categories, and they're kind of implying, they're asking you in a roundabout way what mode you're in.
Right.
You know, like that's basically what they're doing. They're not being upfront about it, but a lot of other companies are. Tesla asks you what mode you want to be in. So a mode is a mindset and a set of behaviors that we get into temporarily that allows us to do a lot of different things. And from a digital platform standpoint, people who are building digital platforms, if they know the mode that you're in, they understand the context. They understand a lot about the situation that you find yourself in. We talk about this, people in normal everyday discussions use the term mode frequently, more frequently today than they did 10 years ago when we first started studying this concept. It's become a really important way for you to set the context for the people around you and say, this is the mode I'm in. So I think it's a really simple but important leap that a lot of companies haven't made yet towards understanding customer situation.
Right. If you can't figure out what mode they're in, right, at least ask them rather than presume there's sort of this standard, standard entity that you are.
Well,
they ask us when we log in, are you a robot? We say no. And then they treat us like we are.
Excellent.
Never thought about it that way.
I'm going to use that one, Francis.
The most sophisticated environments today are these new cars. And that's why I keep going back to car examples. I just got an F-150 with Blue Cruise, and it drives itself on certain roads, right? It's responding to the environment. It allows me to do so many different things. It has like 10 different modes that I can be in. As homes become more sophisticated, they're going to behave in a similar way. They're going to become very much focused on the situation and not based on your personal preferences or something along that line. And I think work needs to become situationally smart as well, So I saw somebody raise their hands. Is it permissible to ask a question? There was a question, or was it just me?
It might have been you. You might have had a question for yourself.
Right.
But no, it's absolutely permissible if anybody has questions.
Yes, raise your hand or put one in the chat would be a great way to do that. But Dave, I actually trying to think if I I've written a lot lately on employee experiences and employee transformations. And until you just said that, I'm not sure I've ever really considered the notion of the genius platforms applying to employees. But it's absolutely the case. In fact, there may be even more value because it's so much easy. I would think it's so much easier to get the right information on the mode that you're in, at the right time, so that you can apply the tools that the company has to help you get in that mode and get the right work done at the right time.
Absolutely. You've got all of this real estate that nobody wants to use back at the office because everybody wants to work remotely from their home. Part of the reason they want to work remotely from their home is that they can control the context.
Right,
Not
right.
always. Sometimes they have little kids and that's a problem, but they have a lot more technology at home than they do at work to support them in their ability to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. But you could imagine in the future that, and not in the future per se, it could be today, that we have these virtual rooms that are created for post-it note activities or whatever, and that we actually go to those places for the purposes of doing good group work, because that's the job that we're trying to get done. So
Makes a
I
great
think there's
point. That
what's that?
Slack in particular, he's talking about calendar and IM status, but I think Slack has really nailed modes thinking. And
Mhm.
that you in tech organizations, certainly where everyone is using Slack, people routinely throughout the day update their mode to let people know as a communication tool, this is how I want you to interact with me. Tim, hi. What's your
Hi
question?
guys, all the
Hi.
way from the UK. I just wanted to back up what Dave was saying. I think it's for me it's about small steps. So I'm supportive of what you're saying, David. I think ultimately let's look at Tesla. Let's give the customer the opportunity to be in control and give them the curated choice to ask them, because if you're in a business, it's quite a big step to try and anticipate, and it requires a lot of data and a lot of learning. I haven't seen many businesses, certainly in the UK and maybe some in the States, where that's happening. So let's make a small first step. Let's give the customer the control, and let's give them the options. If we give them that option, there's so much learning, and then we can be maybe a bit more proactive and maybe
Mhm.
suggest. Just a thought.
Yeah, I like it. I agree. We have a tendency to, and that's to your point, we have a tendency to want to anticipate in the wrong way,
Mhm.
where we basically tell them what they should do next. That doesn't necessarily work either. So we can put a lot of time and energy into telling people this is the ideal way that you should go through this experience.
The
When
customer
actually,
journey.
yeah, right. When actually what the customer wants you to do is give them control. At allow them to do it, which may be much simpler lift for the company from a technology standpoint than trying to um, trying to anticipate exactly. We've been researching modes for 10 years now, and in the early days, we would try to anticipate what mode the customer was going to be in, and then just bring it up for them immediately. And they told us over and over again they weren't interested in that. They felt perfectly good about you getting close and giving them like 3 different choices for the modes that they could be in, and then letting them choose. That felt like enough anticipation to them. And it was a much easier lift for the company because the company maybe only had like 7 modes that they were supporting, and then they just tried to pick the 3 that were most relevant. That's plenty. That's a great way to get started. We don't have to try to be way too sophisticated in the way that we approach the design.
You remind me of one example that sort of bugs me all the time is, and I've been on vacation and some work for the last couple of 3 weeks. And so since I'm in places I'm not as familiar, I'm using Google Maps a lot, as I'm driving around. But for the most part, I know where I'm going. It's just like when it gets close, I don't know the exact street I should move on that. Even at home, if I live outside of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and if I go to either downtown, it's like, I I'm not quite sure of exactly where to go or how to get back on the highway when I'm coming back, but once I'm there, boom, I know where I am. So I often would be looking up the place in advance, right? And then hoping it stays on my Google Maps so that I've got an opportunity sometime when I'm driving, which I shouldn't be doing unless I'm at a light, right? To be able to say, okay, now start. I don't, because I hate the voice talking at me. I just hate the voice talking at me, particularly when I know where I'm going. And I want to say, okay, I'm always then say, okay, now start. Right. So why can't I do that in advance? Why can't I say, this is where I'm going, and here's where I want you to start giving me directions?
Right. That feature will be added now because you've asked for it, Joe, because
because Google is listening.
right, exactly. You know what, Francis, I wonder if we want to talk a little bit about time well spent, the time aspect of this, because that's
Yeah.
just as important.
Agree. So not everyone here is necessarily familiar with what you even mean by time well spent. So give us a bit of a primer on why we're talking about time so much.
I'll start, Joe, you can build on it. One of the chief concerns that both of us have had for years is the way that experienced strategists think about time. Because we all know that time is important, the customer's time is important, but there has been this tendency to focus on convenience, trying to make everything as convenient as you possibly can. To the point where a lot of companies are putting themselves out of business because there's really no interaction between them and the customer anymore. They have been reduced down to a digital task. And that goes against the grain of what we've always talked about as what an experience is. A customer that values you should want to actually spend more time with you in some way, shape, or form. So just thinking from a business standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense the way that we've talked about convenience historically. From a customer's standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense because what has happened is companies have hit the customer with so many different technologies, each of which is specialized in a specific area, doesn't talk to any other technology, and wants that share of time, that micro moment, so that the customer then is constantly juggling all of these different little tasky things that don't build up to that meaningful life that they really want. So everything gets reduced down to simple transactions, and it just doesn't feel right. And this early on, Joe, you really helped to point out that this would lead us to a place where we wouldn't have experiences. What we would have instead were commoditized services.
Right, exactly, because what that is, and we talked about in the article about people trying for frictionless, right, experiences, except frictionless cannot be experiences, because experiences have to be frictionful, because that gives you the drama for people to remember things. And so it's really thinking about and juxtaposing of the time well spent. And I still remember when Dave introduced that term to me, the notion of time well saved. And that's what the frictionless is about. That's what the commoditized services do, is they provide time well saved. That's what the whole CX movement, for goodness sakes, which really flowed out of our book, The Experience Economy, in the 1990s, but really bastardized the concept by calling it the customer experience, when again, it's not an experience, because what they are about is making things nice and easy and convenient. And nice is nice, but rarely does it rise to the level of an experience, right? Of being memorable, right? Memorable is what creates a true distinctive experience. When we say make things easy, we often routinize things for employees to deliver that frictionless experience or frictionless service, excuse me. But that gets in the way of being personal, and experiences are inherently personal because they actually happen inside of us in reaction to the events that are staged in front of us. And then convenience is the antithesis of time well spent, right? Convenience is get in and out as quickly as possible, spend as little time with the company as possible, when what customers value is the time that the company spends with them. Again, with that dramatic memorable and personal experiences. So experiences are time well spent, but services are time well saved. And then as part of this time progression is recognized, as Rancho said at the very beginning, the worst thing you do is waste your customer's time, right? So there's time wasted. And I don't want to say well wasted, but sometimes I'll say there's time badly wasted when we ask our customers things that aren't going to benefit them. For example, when we one of my favorite examples is you go into a healthcare office or a hospital, and the first thing they do is they give you a sheet of information to fill out of information they already know, right? That's wasting my time. They already have all this information. So we often put roadblocks up with customers to be able to slow them down and get them to give us again data that we're not going to use. Instead of providing them value, right? So stop wasting customers' time, at least get to the time well saved level, but time well spent is where the experience really comes in. And then that fourth level that we talk about in the article is time well invested. Time well invested is going beyond the experience, providing transformative experiences that actually benefit people over time, that help them guide and achieve their aspirations. And those are what we call transformations, where you're using experiences as a raw material to guide people to change, where they're investing their time in those transformative experiences and expect it to pay dividends now and into the future, right? And that's when we're investing our time wisely. And companies would benefit a great deal if they thought about the opportunities to help people invest their time in becoming better at what they want to do, in doing better. As Tim Hughes sent me a message about that, wanting to, and doing better are great things to think about in terms of time well invested rather than just time well spent. Again, all built on top of each other, very related to each other, but you can go beyond that time well spent to time well invested.
I think a lot of companies get scared off though, because they think this sounds harder. And
Yeah, it's not.
don't
It's
necessarily
not.
believe in the economic value. So talk to us about both of those.
There's a different term that you can use that can help with that baby step part of this. If your company is completely focused on easy, simple convenience, the term I like that connotes time well saved to me is instantaneous. There's something dramatic about the term instantaneous that suggests that there's a kind of a buildup, and then there's that instantaneousness, and then wow, there's a little bit of a wow that's associated with it. So maybe that's a place to start, changing your vernacular to talk about instantaneous in some way, shape, or form. But you do want to move beyond that to thinking about, where are the situations where we really do need to customers to spend a little time with us, or the customer really needs to spend a little time with us. And how do we design that? What does that look like? And in that case, when we're talking about time well spent, where we want them to spend a little time with us, maybe it's in a person-to-person interaction, or maybe it's because they're in a particular mode and we know that they're going to want to spend a little bit more time, they're doing some browsing. Our objective is not to speed things up necessarily, but to find ways to make sure that the experience starts well. It has a build to it. There's some kind of climactic component to it, and that they want to linger. And we think about those elements, and we design it purposely to take up that amount of time. That can be done digitally, it can be done in person, or a combination thereof, right? The value that's created from that can be measured a number of different ways. We have a tool we call the time well spent metric that focuses just on evaluating customers, the time that customers spend with you. But there's a number of different ways that you can measure the effect that it's having for the company.
Well said. Joe, anything you want to build on that?
Well, yeah, I think that a proxy for time well spent is in fact just time itself, right? How much time are they spending with you, right? And if you can at least eliminate the fact, well, they're spending time with you because they can't get done what they want to get done, right? If you eliminate that prospect, then that's often the case. In the 2020 re-release of the Experience Account, we in fact introduced a new metric that I love called the money value of time, which is the amount of expenditures that people give you per minute of time. And it's a great way to look cross industries at experiences of all kinds, particularly admission fee experiences, where you can look at how much they're paying to be in your experiences versus how much time it is. And movies as sort of a standard are about a dime a minute, right? That's how much time you're spending for a movie, is a dime a minute. But you go to Disneyland or Disney World, you're paying about 20 cents a minute. But you go to some of these escape rooms and immersive art experiences, you're up to 40, 50, 60 cents a minute. And it's just amazing how much more money they get because they provide a more concentrated level of time well spent. Right? It's exactly what they're doing is that time well spent. And in that context also, you want to still build off of time well saved, right? If you're going into some admission fee experiences, let's say you're going to Walt Disney World, right? You don't spend 20 minutes up front getting into it, right? By pulling out your tickets and showing your tickets and all that. That's why they developed the Magic Band. Others where you just go boom and done. It's a less than 1 minute process they have taken it down to, which increases the great throughput that they have. So based off of that time well saved innovation, you now have more time well spent that you are spending in the park.
Yeah, I love that. I love that example.
So how do you convince companies to leave friction? Because I think it's pretty provocative what we're saying here, that it's not about being frictionless. It's about creating a meaningful experience and adding value.
Well, one argument for not focusing just on friction would be just the craziness that companies go through to try to create omni-channel strategies, where they're spending enormous sums of money to try to integrate the channels that they have. When if you ask customers what they really want is for the ability to get the job done.
Right.
It really doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you can connect these two channels together. It has to do with your ability to get the job done. And a perfect example of this, I just moved I know this is going to, bear with me here for a second.
Is this a first
world problem,
Dave?
Yeah, this is a first world problem, but I moved my prescriptions from Walgreens to Amazon Pharmacy. And the whole reason I did it is because I was convinced that Amazon would actually get the prescriptions to me, and without all of this craziness where I had to try to take a phone call and then show up at a certain time and then maybe it's there and talk to the person. It had nothing to do with the fact that the channels didn't talk to each other, because the channels were actually talking to each other, maybe poorly, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was I just needed to get that particular functional job done. And I'm hoping that Amazon can do it for me. Maybe I'll have problems, but I'm grateful that I don't have a ton of different channels that I have to work with in order to actually accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish.
I would love to learn more about that, Dave. Amazon
it's great.
PillPack for $1 billion, which is a great example of mass customization, right? Because they deliver exactly what you want when you need it. I'm hoping maybe also you'll be able to contact them at some point and say, hey, I'm going to be in Korea for 3 weeks or wherever it might be.
Yeah.
Bill's delivered here, right? Because my prescription won't come due until that certain point. To Rance's point, a question, I want to elaborate on what I said earlier about experiences need to be friction full. And I'll give you an easy example again. We'll go back to theme parks or amusement parks. Is think about a roller coaster. What do roller coasters do? Well, they basically take you from one point and then deliver you back to the same point, right? That's their core function. You would think about it if you thought of it as a service. But what they do is that they go up and down and around and all these different things. Every movement outside of a straight circle is friction, right? You're adding friction to it, and that's what makes it a great experience. And it's true of any experience that you need to have dramatic structure. And what does dramatic structure mean? Well, it means you rise up to a climax and you come back down again, right? Simple as that. That's what drama is. If you have no drama, if it's flat, if it's frictionless, then guess what? There's no memory. There's no experience. You've got to rise up. You've got to have that friction. I remember often talking with clients where I talk about dramatic structure and that you need to have what's called in theater terms, right? Rising action and then crisis, right? Crisis. What's crisis? Crisis is all the obstacles that the hero has to overcome in order to save the day. And people say, we don't want crisis. That's bad. We want to get job. No, think of it as anticipation. That again, if there is no crisis, if there is no rising action, there is no experience. But create suspense, create anticipation, create that type of friction in order to bring people up to then save the day for them and come back down again.
I love it when you talk about that. And I think it does such a wonderful job of illustrating the experiential value of these investments. Before we run out of time, any questions from those of you who made your way all the way over to this Zoom despite the dramatic action?
Friction. Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, then with these last 5 minutes, what main message do you want to leave us with, Dave? What do you hope we'll remember as we're
one of the things that we're kind of describing in that chart, I think that chart's got a lot going on in it. Yep. Is that there's already a customer expectation that things will move to genius. Smart is not going to be enough. Companies are going to need to move to genius, but genius in and of itself does not, the fact that you have an ecosystem, an experience platform, and you're able to anticipate customers doesn't mean that companies are always going to get it right. So you can drop fairly quickly from creating a genius platform to being not smart, to behaving in a stupid way. If you're not focused on the principles that will keep you up there. And we talked about those principles are going to continue. You need to be able to know the job the customer wants to get done. You need to focus on point of use. You need to anticipate in a way that gives them, empowers them, supports them, turns what they're trying to do into superpowers. That's what's going to become in the future table stakes, and there will be something beyond that. Of that, we're convinced, but it could go the opposite way if you don't do it effectively.
I'll add to that too, is that while virtually any company can rise to the level of smart, not everybody can rise to the level of genius. It is what consumers are expecting, as Dave said, but it's very difficult to do because you need a platform versus just a device. You need to be able to access many different devices across that. So if you can't become a genius platform yourself, then you need to find your role in a genius platform. And again, it's why Amazon bought PillPack and get into pharmacy business, increasingly healthcare and other things, because they think that they can get to that genius level. And if you can't compete against that, then how do you compete with it, right? How do you become part of the ecosystem that a genius platform needs to do more and more of what customers want and value?
Right. I think that's really encouraging and important to think about how.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Could you please define genius?
Andrea, look at the mirror.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That's a great. I think we have a definition actually in the article itself.
But it's defined
a combination of. Yeah, and in the diagram, the components kind of suggested as well.
Right.
So it's any type of digital experience where you've got a platform that anticipates individual needs, turns power skills into superpowers, and anticipates. We would also, of course, argue that that's supported by artificial intelligence of some sort. That's kind of implied. It's also an experience. It's also a platform that gets hundreds of jobs done for you, or maybe 10 times the number of jobs. I think you do see that with the technology that's in cars these days. You can do so much more in your car these days than you used to be able to. So that would be our definition.
So there's a distinct difference, if I'm understanding that correctly, between the anticipatory component of being able to anticipate and provide the opportunity for a million different experiences and the actual experiences that result from that. Does that make sense, my question?
Right again.
In other words, is there a difference between the, just reading off the graph, the anticipations of what the individual wants and turning those anticipations into skills and superpowers? That is different. Like, in other words, the genius component of anticipating and understanding and putting all those options there is actually different from the resulting experience that comes from that.
Well, yeah,
I mean, using the car example, I would imagine.
The experience is felt and understood by the customer, and the technology needs to have the capabilities in order to create that type of an experience. So it could be called a genius platform. You're right, but until the customer interacts with it, it's probably not a genius experience. You're right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And in essence, it is something that the customer would describe as a genius solution for their problems. I think we are at time. We want to still be respectful of your time, despite the fact that we started a few minutes late. We will share this video if there are others that you would like to share it with. If you have any questions for us, if you'd like more information on any of these topics, or are excited to join us for one of our collaborative programs, we will be going into all of this in much greater detail. We have an entire collaborative, in fact, this year, dedicated to digital experiences. And that will be a year-long journey focused on researching and concepting and working with customers to more deeply understand how we better deliver across categories on these genius experiences. So thank you so much for your time. I hope it was time well invested. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you on LinkedIn, on the Experience Strategy Podcast, and more.
Super. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.